The invitation arrived in my mailbox, not as a guest, but as a service provider. Catering contract, Palmer 40th anniversary celebration, was printed in elegant gold lettering across the cream envelope. I stood in my kitchen, hands trembling as I opened it, already knowing what I'd find inside. My name is Charlotte Palmer, and at 35, I'm one of the most sought-after chefs in Boston. My restaurant Maison has 2 Michelin stars and a 6-month waiting list. But to my parents, I'm still just the disappointment who chose cooking over law school, the daughter who embarrassed them by working with her hands instead of following the path they'd laid out. The contract was typical, expected number of guests, 200, dietary requirements, and a proposed menu that made me wince. It was exactly the kind of safe, predictable food my mother would choose. At the bottom, her signature was already there, along with a note in her precise handwriting. We expect nothing but perfection for this event, Charlotte. Don't embarrass us. I set the contract down on my kitchen counter, next to the morning's mail. Among the pile was another letter, this one from my grandmother's lawyer. I'd been avoiding opening it for days, but something about the timing felt right. With steady hands, I broke the seal. Dear Ms. Palmer, it began, as executor of your grandmother Eleanor Palmer's estate, I am pleased to inform you that following the reading of her will, you have been named the sole inheritor of both her estate and her shares in Palmer Industries. I had to read the words 3 times before they sank in. My grandmother, my father's mother, had left everything to me, not to him, not to my perfect older sister Margaret, but to me. The estate, the shares, even her beloved vineyard in Napa. Everything my father had assumed would be his was now mine. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Have you reviewed the contract? We need an answer by tomorrow. Your father insists on having Maison cater this event. Of course he did. Despite refusing to eat at my restaurant, despite never acknowledging my success, they still wanted to use my name, my reputation, to impress their friends. I thought about all the family events I'd been excluded from over the years, all the times they'd made it clear I wasn't good enough to be a Palmer. I picked up my phone and typed, "I'll do it. Send me the guest list and I'll handle everything." "Excellent," she replied instantly. "The guest list is attached. Remember, nothing too experimental. These are sophisticated people, Charlotte." I opened the attachment, pages of names, the who's who of Boston society. My name wasn't among them, of course. I was just the help. That evening, as I sat in my office at Maison reviewing the contract, my sous chef Marcus knocked on the door. "Hey boss, you okay? You've been staring at that paper for an hour." I looked up at him, a plan already forming in my mind. "Marcus, remember when we talked about that pop-up concept, the one with the interactive tables and performance elements?" He nodded, eyes lighting up. "The one where we turned dinner into theater?" "Yeah, that was brilliant. But you said it was too risky for Maison." "It is," I agreed, a smile spreading across my face. "But I think I found the perfect event to test it out." Marcus raised an eyebrow. "Your parents' anniversary? Are you sure that's wise?" I handed him the letter from my grandmother's lawyer. As he read it, his eyes widened. "Holy shit, Charlotte. This changes everything." "Yes," I said, feeling more confident than I had in years. "Yes, it does. Call the team. We're going to give my parents an anniversary celebration they'll never forget." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the preparations. Every detail was meticulously planned, every element carefully chosen. I hired performers, designed custom tables with built-in screens, and created a menu that would tell a story, my story. My mother called constantly, trying to micromanage everything. "Charlotte, the Hendersons are vegetarian now, and the Whittakers don't eat shellfish. Are you sure you can handle all these restrictions?" "Everything is under control," I assured her each time, not mentioning the real plans taking shape behind the scenes. A week before the event, my sister Margaret showed up at Maison during dinner service. She stood at the host stand, perfectly coiffed in her designer suit, looking down her nose at everything. "Charlotte," she called across the dining room, ignoring the stares from other guests. "We need to talk about the anniversary party." I led her to my office, closing the door behind us. "What's wrong, Margaret?" "Mother is worried you're going to try something unconventional," she said, examining her manicure. "She's heard rumors about some of your more experimental dishes. This needs to be a proper society event, not one of your artistic statements." I smiled. thinking about what was coming. Tell Mother not to worry. This will be exactly the kind of event this family deserves. Margaret gave me a suspicious look but left without further argument. As I watched her walk away, I felt a moment of doubt. Was I really going to do this? Was I really going to use my parents' anniversary to make a point? Then I remembered all the missed birthdays, the cold shoulders at family events, the constant reminders that I wasn't good enough. Yes, I decided. Yes, I was. The day of the event arrived, and I arrived at the venue early with my team. The ballroom of the Four Seasons was transformed according to my vision. Interactive tables with embedded screens, hidden projectors, and a specially designed sound system. Everything was perfect. My mother arrived for the final inspection, her face pinched with worry. "Charlotte, what are all these screens for?" "This looks more like a tech conference than an anniversary celebration." "Trust me, Mother," I said, my voice steady. "Everything has been planned to perfection. Just like you wanted." She didn't look convinced, but it was too late to change anything. The guests would be arriving in a few hours, and the show I planned was about to begin. Little did they know, this anniversary celebration would be talked about in Boston society circles for years to come, just not for the reasons they expected. The guests began arriving at 6, filing into the ballroom in their finest attire. From my position in the kitchen, I watched through the service entrance as my parents greeted everyone, accepting congratulations and gifts with practiced grace. My father in his custom tuxedo, my mother resplendent in a designer gown. They looked every bit the power couple they worked so hard to become. I checked my watch. 20 minutes until dinner service would begin. My team moved with precision around me, each person knowing their role in what was about to unfold. The interactive tables were already programmed, the projectors tested, the timing rehearsed to perfection. "Charlotte," Marcus called softly from beside me. "The lawyer's here." I nodded, watching as my grandmother's attorney, Mr. Harrison, took his seat at one of the central tables. He was the only person besides Marcus who knew what was coming. His presence was essential for what I had planned. At precisely 6:30, my mother clanked her glass, signaling for everyone to take their seats. The tables, which appeared normal except for their slightly glossy surface, would soon come alive with my story. "Before we begin dinner," my mother announced, her voice carrying across the room, "Robert and I want to thank you all for being here to celebrate 40 years of marriage. And of course, we must thank our daughter Charlotte for catering this evening's meal." A polite smattering of applause followed. I noticed how she didn't refer to me as their daughter, just Charlotte, always keeping that distance, that distinction. I stepped out of the kitchen, nodding acknowledgement to the guests. My father didn't even look in my direction, too busy chatting with some business associates. Margaret sat at the family table, perfectly poised, occasionally glancing at me with barely concealed disdain. The first course arrived, a seemingly simple dish of heirloom tomato soup. As the bowls were placed before each guest, the table suddenly illuminated. Projected onto the glossy surface were images of my childhood, family dinners where I sat alone at the kitchen counter while they entertained in the dining room, holidays where I was relegated to helping the staff rather than joining the celebrations. Murmurs rippled through the crowd as the images played out. My mother's face tightened, but she couldn't say anything without causing a scene. "This soup," I announced, my voice clear and strong, "is made from tomatoes grown in my grandmother Eleanor's garden. The same garden where she taught me to cook while everyone else was too busy to notice I existed." The second course brought more revelations. As waiters served perfectly seared scallops, the tables showed my graduation from culinary school, an event my parents hadn't attended. Alongside it played clips from my restaurant's opening night, reviews from food critics, and a ceremony where I received my first Michelin star. "Your scallops are paired with a sauce made from wine produced at Eleanor Palmer's vineyard," I explained, watching my father's face carefully. The same vineyard that, along with her entire estate and shares in Palmer Industries, she left to me in her will. The room went silent. My father's head snapped up, his face draining of color. My mother's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. "What did you say?" my father demanded, standing up so abruptly his chair scraped across the floor. Mr. Harrison chose that moment to stand, clearing his throat. "What your daughter says is correct, Mr. Palmer. Your mother's will was quite clear. Everything, the estate, the vineyard, and her 30% controlling interest in Palmer Industries was left to Charlotte." The ballroom erupted in whispers. My father's business associates exchanged significant looks. They knew what this meant. With my grandmother's shares, I now had significant control over the company he'd spent his life building. "This is ridiculous," Margaret burst out, her perfect composure cracking. "There must be some mistake. Why would grandmother leave everything to her?" I smiled, signaling for the next course to be served. "Because, Margaret, while you and Dad were too busy running the company to visit her, I spent every Sunday cooking with her, listening to her stories, and sharing her love of food. She saw me even when none of you did." As the main course arrived, a perfectly aged ribeye with truffle butter, the tables displayed one final set of images, my grandmother and me in her kitchen, both of us laughing as we cooked together. Her last Christmas, when she insisted on having dinner at my restaurant instead of the family mansion. The day she first tasted my food and cried, saying she was proud of me. "Your main course," I announced, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm me, "is served with vegetables from Eleanor's garden and wine from her vineyard." She always said that good food brings people together, but only if they're willing to sit at the same table as equals. My father remained standing, his face a mask of barely controlled rage. "Charlotte," he growled, "we need to discuss this. Now." "No, Dad," I replied calmly. "We don't. Everything has already been decided. The papers were signed this morning. But don't worry, I won't run the company the way you did. I believe in giving people a chance to prove themselves, regardless of whether they fit into some predetermined mold." The rest of dinner service continued in tense silence, broken only by the quiet murmurs of guests trying to process what they'd witnessed. My mother sat rigid in her chair, barely touching her food. Margaret kept shooting venomous looks in my direction, while my father seemed to age years before my eyes. As dessert was served, a deconstructed apple pie, my grandmother's recipe, I made one final announcement. In honor of my grandmother's memory and her belief in nurturing talent wherever it's found, I'm establishing a culinary school scholarship program. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation will provide full funding for aspiring chefs who, like me, might not fit society's expectations but have the passion and drive to succeed. I watched as my words sank in. This wasn't just about inherited wealth or company shares. This was about changing the narrative, about creating opportunities for others who might have been overlooked or dismissed. The evening ended earlier than planned, guests making polite excuses to leave as the tension in the room became unbearable. As the last of them filed out, my father finally approached me, his face ashen. "You've ruined everything," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Was that your plan? To humiliate us in front of everyone we know?" I met his gaze steadily. "No, Dad. My plan was to show you exactly what you've been missing all these years, what you threw away because it didn't fit your perfect vision of what this family should be." The aftermath of my parents' anniversary celebration sent shockwaves through Boston's elite social circles. The story spread quickly, how Charlotte Palmer, the outcast chef daughter, had inherited her grandmother's fortune and used her parents' own anniversary to reveal it. The morning after, I sat in my office at Maison reviewing the paperwork Mr. Harrison had prepared. The ownership transfer was complete. I now controlled not only my grandmother's estate but also had significant influence over Palmer Industries. My phone hadn't stopped buzzing since the event. Texts from Margaret ranged from threats to desperate attempts at reconciliation. My mother's messages were similarly mixed, alternating between guilt trips and offers to discuss things like family. But it was my father's single email that caught my attention. "Charlotte, what you did last night was calculated and cruel. You've not only embarrassed this family but potentially damaged the company I spent my life building. If this was revenge, congratulations. You've succeeded. Your father." I read it twice before clicking reply. "Dad, this wasn't about revenge. It was about showing you what you threw away, not just with me, but with your own mother. While you were busy building your empire, you missed what was happening in your own family. Grandmother saw it. That's why she made the choice she did. I don't plan to damage the company. Unlike you, I believe in giving people chances. Come by Maison tonight at 8 if you want to talk about the future. Charlotte." To my surprise, he showed up. I watched through the kitchen window as he entered the restaurant, looking uncomfortable and out of place. He'd never set foot in Maison before, had never tasted my food or acknowledged my success. I led him to a private dining room where I prepared a simple meal, his mother's recipes, the comfort food she used to make when he was young. As he sat down, I noticed how old he suddenly looked, how tired. Your grandmother, he said finally, staring at the bowl of beef stew I placed in front of him. She used to make this every Sunday. I know, I replied softly. She taught me. She told me stories about you while we cooked. How you loved this stew, how you'd help her in the kitchen before the business took over your life. He took a bite, and I saw his hands shake slightly. It tastes exactly the same, he whispered. She wanted you to have more than just the business, Dad. She wanted you to remember what it was like to care about something beyond success and status. That's why she left everything to me, not to hurt you, but to make you stop and think. Over the next 2 hours, we talked more than we had in years. He told me about his own dreams of becoming a chef before his father pushed him into business. I shared stories about grandmother that he'd never heard, moments he'd missed while chasing his definition of success. I don't expect forgiveness, he said as the evening wound down. What we did to you, how we treated you, it was wrong. I'm not looking for apologies, I replied. I want change, real change, starting with how Palmer Industries treats its employees, how it views success. He nodded slowly. And how do you propose we do that? First, we establish the Eleanor Palmer Foundation properly, not just culinary scholarships, but programs for employees' children, support for small businesses, community outreach. Then we look at the company culture. No more promoting people just because they fit a certain mold. To my surprise, he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Will you teach me?" "Teach you what?" "How to cook," he said, looking almost embarrassed. "These recipes, your grandmother's recipes. I'd like to learn." That was 6 months ago. Now, every Sunday, my father comes to Maison early before we open. We cook together, and sometimes he tells me stories about his mother that I never knew. Margaret eventually came around, especially after I offered to teach her too. She's actually quite good with pastries, though she never admitted to her society friends. My mother took longer to accept the changes, but even she has started attending our Sunday cooking sessions. Last week, she asked me to teach her how to make grandmother's apple pie. The Eleanor Palmer Foundation is thriving. We've already provided scholarships to 15 aspiring chefs, and our community programs are making real differences in people's lives. Palmer Industries is changing too, slowly but surely becoming a company that values more than just the bottom line. As for me, I'm still running Maison, still creating and experimenting. But now, when I look out into my dining room, I sometimes see my family there, enjoying my food, being part of my world. It's not perfect. We still have our moments of tension, our old habits that die hard. But last night, as I watched my father carefully chopping vegetables in my kitchen, his tie tucked into his shirt to keep it clean, I realized something. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't about hurting those who hurt you. Sometimes it's about giving them a chance to change, to see the world differently, to taste what they've been missing. My grandmother understood that. That's why she left me her legacy. Not to divide the family, but to give us a chance to come together again, around a different kind of table. The menu at Maison still features that tomato soup from the anniversary dinner, but now beneath its description on the menu, there's a small note. From Eleanor's Garden, where every meal tells a story and every story deserves to be heard. It's become our most popular dish.